In a small rented room tucked deep in Nairobi's Eastlands, 26-year-old Achieng stood in front of a cracked mirror, adjusting the sleeves of her ivory wedding dress. It wasn't new or fancy, but it was her dream dress, sewn with love by her late mother, who always told her she deserved a big, beautiful love. Today she believed that dream was coming true. After years of working hard and facing life storms alone, she was finally marrying Baraka, the charming, soft-spoken banker from Kisumu who had swept her off her feet. Everyone said they looked perfect together. As she placed the veil over her braided hair, her hands shook, not from nerves but from hope. Hope that this day would be the start of something beautiful. Outside, she could already hear drums and laughter from relatives who had traveled all the way from her village in Siaya to celebrate. They danced, sang, and called her name, proud of the girl they had helped raise. Her grandmother's words echoed in her heart. Today our girl becomes a queen. Achieng smiled, eyes shining, ready to walk into forever. But deep inside a small unease sat quietly in her chest. Something she couldn't explain. Maybe it was just wedding day jitters. Or maybe, just maybe, her heart already knew something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. Because in a few short minutes her whole world, the dress, the dream, and the man, would all change in ways she could never imagine. Outside the small building in Nairobi, the air was full of music, laughter, and excitement. Achieng's relatives and friends had traveled all the way from her rural village, Siaya, just to see this big day. They wore their best clothes, colorful dresses, and shining shoes. Some held gifts, others carried food, but all of them carried joy. The women danced with drums beating fast, ululating with pride. The men clapped and laughed, telling stories of how they had known Achieng since she was a little girl running barefoot in the village paths. Her grandmother, wearing a bright blue kitenge, sat quietly near the front. Her eyes sparkled with tears and pride as she whispered softly, "Today our girl becomes a queen." Everyone was excited. Cameras were out, ready to capture every moment. Children ran around with flower petals in their hands. The decorations were simple but beautiful: white ribbons, pink flowers, and chairs placed neatly under a big tent. The music played loudly, and the MC kept saying, "The bride is almost ready, and the groom will arrive any minute now." But as the minutes passed, some people started looking around. A small silence began to grow among the noise. The groom was not there. The car that was supposed to bring him hadn't arrived. The best man was also missing. The clock ticked. Whispers began to rise, quiet at first but growing. "Where is Baraka?" someone asked. Another said, "Maybe he's just late." But Achieng's grandmother frowned and held her walking stick tighter. She had seen many things in her life, and something about this moment didn't feel right. Still, everyone kept smiling, still dancing, still hoping. They didn't know yet that this day, meant for love and celebration, was about to take a shocking turn. The room was quiet, filled with soft music and whispers as Achieng sat surrounded by her bridesmaids, getting the final touches done. Her heart was calm, even a little excited now. She looked perfect in her ivory dress, her mother's necklace resting gently on her neck. Just then, one of her bridesmaids rushed into the room, breathing heavily, eyes wide with shock. Everyone turned to look at her. Achieng stood up quickly, her hands gripping the sides of her dress. The bridesmaid took a deep breath and said, "He's here." Achieng let out a small laugh of relief, her smile breaking through. But then the next words came, soft and sharp like a knife. "But he's holding Nafula's hand." Time froze. Achieng blinked. "What? Who?" she asked, not sure if she had heard right. The room went quiet. No one moved. The name Nafula hung heavy in the air. Achieng's mind began to spin. Nafula, the ex-girlfriend, the one who left for Dubai years ago, the one Baraka always said was just a part of his past, someone he no longer even spoke to. He had promised many times that it was over between them. Long forgotten, no contact, no feelings. But now, on her wedding day, he had arrived holding Nafula's hand? Another bridesmaid peeked through the curtain. Her hand flew to her mouth. "It's true," she whispered. "They're walking in together. She's in a gown, not a guest dress. A real gown." Achieng felt her knees weaken. The music outside kept playing. The crowd was still dancing, still waiting for her to walk out. But inside the room, everything had changed. The air grew heavy. Her chest felt tight. Her dream day was slipping away like sand between her fingers. Questions rushed into her mind. Why was Nafula here? Why today? Why like this? But deep inside, something in her heart already knew. This was no accident. This was betrayal, dressed in a suit and smile. And the storm had only just begun. The music changed as the doors to the ceremony opened. Everyone turned to look, expecting the groom to walk in with a smile, maybe a wave, ready to meet his bride at the altar. But what they saw made the entire hall fall silent. Baraka stepped in, dressed sharply in a dark blue suit, but he wasn't alone. Holding his hand tightly was Nafula, glowing in a long, shiny, glamorous gown that sparkled under the lights. Their fingers were locked together, like a couple deeply in love. The guests gasped loudly. Some stood up. Others began whispering. A few people took out their phones and started filming, not believing what they were seeing. Achieng, standing just behind the curtains, could hear the sound of confusion rising from the crowd. Her heart began to race so fast she felt dizzy. Her hands started to tremble as her body froze in shock. Her best friend held her arm, but it was no use. Achieng's veil slipped off her head and dropped to the floor. She didn't even notice. Inside the hall, Baraka walked confidently like nothing was wrong. He smiled at a few familiar faces, still holding Nafula's hand like it was the most normal thing in the world. Nafula stood tall beside him, not ashamed, not hiding, as if she belonged there, as if she was the bride. People in the audience looked back toward the entrance, waiting for someone to say it was a mistake, a joke, a dream gone wrong. But no one spoke. No one moved. It felt like the whole world had paused. Achieng's grandmother stood up slowly from her chair, her face pale, her hands shaking. The joy that had filled the air just moments ago was gone, replaced by confusion and quiet pain. Achieng tried to breathe, but her chest felt heavy. Her dream, the one she had waited for all her life, was cracking right in front of everyone. Still hidden behind the curtain, she wiped her face slowly, not with tears, but with growing strength, because what was about to happen next would shock everyone even more. Baraka walked slowly to the front of the ceremony hall, still holding Nafula's hand. The music had stopped, and the crowd sat in complete silence. All eyes were on him. Achieng stayed hidden behind the curtain, her heart beating loudly in her chest. She didn't know what he was about to say, but every part of her body told her it would hurt. Baraka reached for the microphone, his voice calm, as if this was just a normal announcement. "Before we proceed," he said, looking around the room, "there's something you all need to know." A small wave of murmurs passed through the guests. Some leaned forward. Others looked confused. Achieng stood still, listening. Baraka turned slightly toward Nafula, and then gently pulled her closer. She gave a small smile, her hand resting on her stomach. Baraka continued, "We decided to do this together." He looked down, then back at the crowd. "Nafula is pregnant." Gasps filled the air. A woman in the back covered her mouth. Someone dropped their phone. Achieng felt like the ground beneath her was shaking. But Baraka didn't stop there. "I couldn't marry Achieng without telling the truth," he added, as if this was an act of honesty, not betrayal. "I didn't plan it this way, but things changed. And I had to follow my heart." The room was no longer quiet. Some guests stood up, others began whispering loudly. Achieng's grandmother closed her eyes and sat down slowly, her strength leaving her. Behind the curtain, Achieng didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared ahead, her hands no longer shaking. Something inside her had gone quiet. Not empty but calm. Because in that moment, she knew this wasn't just heartbreak. It was a beginning. As the words left Baraka's mouth, the whole hall felt like it had stopped breathing. Achieng, still behind the curtain, felt her knees weaken. Her head spun. Her heart was beating so loudly, she could hear nothing else. Then everything went dark for a moment. Her body gave up, and she collapsed gently to the floor, surrounded by gasps and worried whispers from her bridesmaids. Her grandmother tried to stand but was held back by others. Some guests rushed toward the back, not sure what had happened. But just moments later, before anyone could even help her up, Achieng slowly opened her eyes. She blinked, breathed deeply, and sat up. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't even ask why. She stood on her own, adjusted her dress, picked up her veil from the floor, and walked calmly toward the stage like a queen walking through fire. People moved aside as she passed. No one could believe how calm she looked. Her face was cold, her eyes sharp. She walked straight to the front where Baraka and Nafula stood, confused and silent. Without asking, she took the mic from his hand. The room held its breath. She looked at the crowd, then at the two people who had just broken her heart in front of everyone. "Then let me be the first to bless your union," she said, her voice steady and clear. A pause. Everyone leaned in, waiting. "With the gift of truth." Gasps again. Murmurs. Achieng didn't stop. Baraka's smile faded. Nafula looked down. But Achieng stood tall. Because now, it was her turn to speak, and what she had to say would change everything. Achieng held the microphone tightly, her hands no longer shaking. The crowd was silent, waiting, confused, unsure of what she meant by the gift of truth. Baraka stood beside Nafula, his smile gone now, his face beginning to tighten. Achieng looked straight at him, then turned back to the guests. "I was going to say this in my vows," she said softly, "but I think now is a better time." She reached into the side of her dress and pulled out a folded envelope. Slowly, she opened it and held up a few printed papers for everyone to see. "Baraka," she said, "while you were planning this show, I was preparing something too." She took a breath and continued. 6 months ago, Baraka asked me to help him apply for a small loan. He said it was for our future, for the wedding, for our first home. He promised to pay it back quickly. I trusted him. She paused, her voice still calm but firm. But he didn't just ask for help. He forged my signature and took out a much bigger loan. He used my name, my ID, and left me in debt while he fixed his own credit record. He used me to clean his mess. Gasps filled the room again. Nafula looked at Baraka, her face shocked. Baraka stepped back slightly, shaking his head. "She's lying," he said quickly. But Achieng didn't even look at him. "I have the proof," she said. "Receipts, documents, screenshots of his messages. And I sent everything to the authorities last night." The crowd began to buzz. People stood. Phones came out again. Achieng held up one last paper, a police report. "They'll be here any minute," she said. "This is not just betrayal. It's fraud." Baraka tried to speak, but his voice was drowned out by whispers and shock. Nafula took a step back, clearly confused and embarrassed. And Achieng? She stood there in her torn dream, not as a broken bride, but as a woman who refused to be used. As Achieng finished speaking, the hall was completely silent. No music, no clapping, just shocked faces staring at her and at Baraka. He stood frozen, not knowing what to do or say. Nafula's hand slowly slipped from his. She looked pale, confused, and scared. Just then, in the distance, the sound of police sirens broke the silence. The guests turned their heads toward the entrance. Some thought it was just part of the drama, a prank, maybe a scare. But it was real. The doors opened wide. 2 uniformed officers entered, followed by a young woman in a smart black suit. Achieng's cousin, a lawyer. She walked with confidence, holding a file in her hands. Behind her, more officers followed. The entire room stood still. People began recording again, whispering louder now. Baraka stepped back, trying to talk, but the lawyer handed the documents to the police. "This is the man," she said calmly. "He's being charged with fraud, identity theft, and emotional manipulation." The officers didn't hesitate. They walked straight to Baraka, handcuffed him, and read him his rights. Baraka kept shaking his head, saying, "Wait, this is a mistake. This is a wedding." But no one believed him anymore. A few guests stood with him, looking worried, but most just watched, shocked by how fast everything had changed. Then suddenly Nafula fainted. She dropped to the floor, and 2 women rushed to help her. The glitter from her gown caught the light as she lay there, unconscious. Some guests left the hall quietly, too stunned to speak. Others stayed, trying to process what just happened. People whispered, "How did Achieng know? How did she stay so strong?" In the middle of it all, Achieng stood tall, her dress now wrinkled and dusty, but her head held high. She didn't cry. She didn't break. She just watched as the man who betrayed her was taken away, not just from the wedding, but from her life. 1 year later, the woman the world once saw fall at her own wedding is now someone entirely different. Achieng didn't let that painful day destroy her. Instead, she used it to rise. In Nairobi, she now runs a growing foundation that helps women who've been abandoned before or during marriage. These women come with broken dreams, heavy hearts, and stories like hers. And Achieng welcomes them with open arms, giving them hope, strength, and a second chance. Her small rented room in Eastlands has been replaced by a cozy office filled with flowers, laughter, and brides who are no longer afraid. She helps them get counseling, legal advice, and sometimes even new dresses. She sits with them, listens to their pain, and reminds them that being left doesn't make them less worthy. It makes them stronger. Newspapers and TV stations have shared her story, calling her the bride who rebuilt herself. And in the center of her office stands a glass case. Inside it hangs the wedding dress she wore that day, torn, stained, and forever changed. But Achieng didn't throw it away. She kept it as a symbol. The lace may be ripped, the veil lost, but the story behind it now carries power. Young girls visit and ask, "Is this the dress from that day?" And she smiles, saying, "Yes, and it's the reason I found my voice." Achieng didn't just survive heartbreak. She transformed it into purpose and became a voice for women who thought they had none. Achieng stood on the bright stage at a Nairobi university, the hall filled with students, teachers, and young women who had followed her story online. She held the microphone with ease now, not the way she held it on her wedding day, with shaking hands and a broken heart. This time, her voice was strong, steady, and full of power. The lights reflected off her simple, elegant dress, not a wedding gown but a new beginning. She smiled at the audience and began, "I wore the dress. He brought the drama. But I left with my dignity, and a louder voice than ever before." The words echoed through the room like music. The crowd clapped loudly, some even standing to cheer. In that moment, Achieng didn't feel pain anymore. She didn't see the faces that once judged her or the cameras that captured her collapse. She saw hope in every young woman looking at her with wide eyes, silently saying, "If she can stand again, maybe I can too." As she walked off the stage, her steps were slow, graceful, proud. She passed the hall where her foundation had set up a table, helping more women sign up for support. Behind her, the applause continued. In front of her, a life of purpose waited. She was no longer the bride left at the altar. She was the woman who turned pain into power. And she never looked back.